Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 52, Kirk, Sanctified. We'll start off with some Star Trek news, and then we'll talk about Star Trek Discovery, Season 4, Episode 4, All is Possible.
Then we'll get into our audience question right after our main topic, Kirk, Sanctified. We're going to be talking about Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, which celebrates its 30th anniversary this month. It's going to be a great episode. Stick around. Well, Mike, by we, I mean you and David.
That's right.
Clearly.
That's exactly right.
We are recording this several days after David and Mike valiantly pushed ahead and recorded an episode in my unexpected absence. I was inexorably detained, and we had delayed recording as long as we could last week, and we wanted to get the episode out. So Mike and David, you did a great job. You just stepped up to the plate and got it done. So thank you.
Well, thank you. We were sorry you couldn't be with us, of course, but we had a good time, and I hope people will hear that as they listen back. And real life happens, but sci-fi stuff happens too. So we got it all.
Yep, we do. So we're doing a double episode drop this week. So I hope everybody enjoys it. Consider it, I guess, sort of a Christmas gift or something. I don't know.
Our listeners have been very good this year, Kevin.
Yes, they have, and we appreciate your support. And thank you for listening. And I'll be with you for episode 53. Right now, we join episode 52, already in progress.
Well, good evening, David.
Good evening, Mike. I am going to be playing the part of Kevin this evening.
I was about to say, I feel like we need one of those soap opera announcers tonight. The part of Kevin C. Neese will be played by.
He looked over at me and said, "You have the conn, David." And so we're going to go ahead and press on and see what happens. Here's hoping that we can do this justice. But it's very exciting to be able to talk to you about this episode of Discovery and about the Undiscovered Country. But I think first we need to talk about Star Trek news.
Yes, there is always plenty of Star Trek news these days, which is exciting. But the one that caught my eye just tonight, actually, was Kalinda Vazquez, who is a writer and producer on Discovery, just inked a deal with Netflix. She's going to be doing first a young adult drama / thriller series called Arbor Hall. And judging from the article in the Hollywood Reporter, she has got a very full plate at Netflix. And of course, she's still, I wondered, my first thought was, does this mean she's no longer writing a Star Trek movie? Because, several months ago, I think we even talked about it on our podcast. Kalinda was signed up to write a Star Trek movie, but Hollywood Reporter says she's still doing that. Being a writer and consulting producer on Star Trek Discovery and writing a Star Trek feature film for Paramount and Bad Robot. So she'll be a very busy woman, but I'm sure she'll acquit herself well with all she does. She's a talented individual.
Yeah, gosh, that is a lot of work to do all at once. I mean, running a show and also writing a feature film. I believe that one was supposed to be the fourth of the Kelvinverse movies, right?
I think so. I mean, I guess I don't know what Bad Robot's position is vis-a-vis all Star Trek movies right now or not, but she's definitely writing one for Bad Robot, so I would presume it would be a fourth Kelvinverse, and I hope it will be, because I really quite enjoy those actors and their takes on the characters, so I'd like to see more from them.
Yeah, me too, and I think that having a woman writing a film, I don't think we've had that yet.
I believe you're correct. Yeah,
and I'm really excited to see sort of like what sort of differences could a different perspective bring to the script.
Yeah. My one wish for the fourth Kelvinverse film, if and when we ever get it, is that they bring back Jayla. From Star Trek Beyond, because I enjoyed the character, and then that was the first Star Trek movie I showed my daughter, actually, and she really liked Jayla as well. Because Jayla's got that whole Rey from Star Wars vibe going on, a little bit.
Right.
But so I think, especially given the unfortunate passing of Anton Yelchin, there's an opening at that Enterprise's helm or navigation station. So I think let's bring back Jayla and put that character in the navigation position. But we'll see.
Totally agreed. Now, I do believe Sofia Boutella is a very again, we're talking about very busy people. I think she's also a very busy actor. Yeah, but I agree very much that seeing her on screen again would be fantastic. I really do agree. I love that character and would love to see it.
You know who else connected with Star Trek is busy, don't you? God's a very busy man.
Are you suggesting that the fourth Kelvinverse movie is going to be a remake of the Final Frontier?
Well, that would be fascinating, I'm sure, but I think they'll probably go in a different direction.
Oh my goodness.
So do you have any Star Trek news for us tonight?
Yes. Actually, this is news that came out last week, but we just didn't get a chance to talk about it during the show last week, or rather, you didn't get a chance to talk about it in the show last week. There has been a sort of doubling down on the rumors, or I guess not rumors at all, they're confirmed, of the Section 31 show.
Oh, really?
Alex Kurtzman has confirmed to Deadline that the Section 31 show with Michelle Yeoh about Georgiou and all of her skullduggery is still alive, is still happening, it's still in pre-production. So as much as we might think that it's been too quiet and it's going away, he says, we're in a very exciting place. I can't tell you anything yet, but it's still very much alive.
So like Section 31. Can't tell you anything.
Yes.
But, well, you know, I have to say, way back when they first announced they were going to do a Section 31 series, I was not a happy Trekker. I thought, because to be honest, Section 31, while I appreciate, I think I've even said this on the podcast before, so forgive me for repeating myself, but while I appreciate that it creates lots of dramatic stories and possibilities, I have trouble squaring it with the Star Trek vision as I understand it. But
Yes.
But given what Michelle Yeoh's character went through in season 3 of Discovery and where she is now and where she's ending up, as far as we know, it could be a very different kind of Section 31 show where
Right.
she's actually undermining the alternate universe's power structure to bring some of our prime Star Trek timeline values into
wouldn't
play
that be fantastic?
clandestinely. So
Yeah. I would love to see that. I think
would
that
too.
would be absolutely fantastic. Of course, Michelle Yeoh also being very busy talking about all of the stuff going on. She's got that movie coming out, I believe, next year, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I just saw a trailer drop for that today. I haven't watched it yet, but yeah.
It's got a lot of buzz, and it's coming out in, I believe, March of next year. So, you know, multiverse stuff is all over everywhere.
Yeah.
Everybody wants it. It's all over everything, everywhere, all at once, you might say.
Yeah, it's hot. It's hot right now. Those multiverses.
But wouldn't it be just like Section 31 if they just, like, with no notice or news or anything like that, if it just dropped in, like, June?
Yes, it would. And you know, if I were Paramount Plus, the Mountain of Entertainment, please sponsor us, I would put out one of those stealth marketing campaigns. Like they did, the BBC did a little bit of this for the last or most recent Doctor Who series, where some kind of cryptic video went out and you didn't know right away even that it was connected with the show. So I'd do some things like that, and maybe a marketing campaign that interfaced with the real physical world too. Like I remember when the Tom Cruise War of the Worlds came out, they had a kind of treasure hunt people could go on in major cities around the U.S. and, you know, so I think if they were going to ask me, which they haven't,
Right.
that's how I would release this thing into the ether.
That would be fantastic.
Well, I'm excited to see what. I'm going to give it a chance for sure. I'm not going to be closed-minded about it. So
Sure, and I mean, I agree that I've never really thought of Section 31 as a particularly heroic focus for a television show, but you know, Michelle Yeoh's character is really compelling, and I think that,
no doubt.
I think that there's a lot that they could do with that, and so I'm hopeful for it. I'm additionally hopeful about the future of Star Trek Discovery in season 4.
Okay. Well, what did you think of the latest episode, All Is Possible?
You know, I really liked it a lot, but I also can't get over the fact that one of my two favorite characters was essentially written off the show.
Oh yes, that floored me.
Yes.
I mean, I've heard since Mary Wiseman say, "Oh no, you haven't seen the last of Tilly," and she said as much to Burnham in the episode. But when the action was wrapping down and there were still 10 minutes left in the episode, I thought, this can't be good.
Right. Yeah.
And sure enough, I was not happy. Now, I will say the writers planted the seeds for this season, right?
Yep.
Tilly had that traumatic experience in the first episode, and then she had to talk to Dr. Culber about it in the second episode. In the third episode, she was moving outside her comfort zone. But it's funny, this week she even said what I thought last week. She said, I've been taking baby steps, because I thought during the third episode, these are all kind of, easy ways to go out of your comfort zone, except for maybe the Kawat Malat mission.
Right.
But so they were laying the seeds, but I didn't see it coming, and I felt sideswiped, even though I really wasn't. I felt that the exposition around it all in those last 10 minutes, and we suddenly find out Tilly's backstory with her mom, and I mean, I'm torn, because on the one hand, it rings true. People will make decisions that seem sudden and out of the blue, and you think, that's not the person I know. That doesn't track. But it's happened in my own life when I decided to leave pastoral ministry. There was, it was just I had decided I was ready for something different and needed something different. And my congregation needed something different too, frankly. Yeah. But anyway, so that happens in real life. So I appreciate the show's mirroring that. But I really don't like it as a choice for the character. Right. I wonder what Mary Wiseman thinks about it and how much input she had into it, because I just adore that character, and I think any Discovery with less Tilly is a little bit less of a Star Trek Discovery. Right. So nothing against the rest of the cast and crew, but
agreed. 100% co-sign everything that you said. I will say I do think that they have mentioned her backstory before, because when they were talking about her sort of hating her mother and joining Starfleet as a middle finger to her mother, I think that struck a chord with me. Rang a bell.
I stand corrected then, but I still don't have to like it.
I don't know if you stand corrected or not. I might be completely wrong. But I agree with you completely about them laying the seeds in advance. And I thought also it was a really interesting little fake out there when they were on the moon, and she's decided that she's going to make the sacrifice and run and try to draw away the creatures, the monsters, and sort of at that moment, with them building up the her sort of listlessness and her feeling of not belonging, I was thinking, oh no, are they going to kill Tilly?
Oh boy, you went to a dark place.
Right?
It never crossed my mind, actually.
Oh really?
No, and I'm often one for wondering and worrying, because modern peak TV has taught me I need to be anxious about my characters' fates all the time. My favorite characters' fates.
And so then, like, all of a sudden, when she was alive and healthy and everything, I was like, oh, okay. Well, so they're not going to write her off the show. And then, of course, they do. With, a little bit different. It's not quite the same. But it reminded me a lot of the sort of bait and switch with Spock in The Wrath of Khan, where the rumors had gone flying around that Spock was going to die in this movie, and so they just killed him in the first 5 minutes, and then showed, oh no, it was fake, it was all pretend, ha ha ha.
Yeah.
And then when it actually happened, it was even more gobsmacking. And so I think that might have,
until it wasn't.
right? Yeah, exactly. And so I think that might have additionally added to my shock that they pulled her off the show, because alongside Saru, she's one of my favorite characters on Discovery.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, it just never occurred to me that they really would kill her off when she was drawing off the J.J. Abrams ice monsters there.
Right.
So let's talk about the mission on the ice moon. I know it's like one of the laziest ways to critique something by saying what it could have been. But that said, I felt the subplot with the Starfleet Academy cadets could have been really compelling, could have been very rich in characterization, could have been very rich in world building, because we're still meeting Starfleet and the Federation really in the 32nd century. Could have been very transformational for Adira and for Tilly. I felt it could have been all those things had it not been one of 3 subplots crammed into an episode. And now Discovery has done this a few weeks in a row now, where there's 3 plots, and sometimes, like last week, I thought they did it very well. This week, I felt like the Academy Cadet subplot was given really short shrift. I felt like we were told and not shown most of the things we know about these cadets, and told by Adira. We didn't even, she gave this big long speech in the 4th act about, well, really, his father was the one who had the idea for the armistice, et cetera, and
right.
Big long info dump, and then all of a sudden, these 2 cadets bury the hatchet. I found the subplot not all that engaging, rushed, and disappointing. So,
yeah,
I don't know what your thoughts were.
So, well, first of all, I don't disagree entirely. I did think that this one felt very Deep Space Nine-esque, and I think the reason is that it was very self-contained, and yet it had connections to this sort of broader storyline, right? So it felt like a Dominion War episode, I guess.
Yeah.
Where the ones where like the Dominion War is like the undercurrent, but then they've got to like go deliver an ambassador to another planet or whatever, like some very benign, normal sort of thing that like Next Generation would have done. But like they're doing this in the middle of this crisis moment. And so I felt like that was an interesting sort of throwback kind of feel to it. But I felt like it also suffered from not characterizing the cadets as well as it maybe could have. I think that they could have made this Discovery's Lower Decks. I don't mean the season or the series. I mean the Next Generation episode.
Right. I'm tracking you. Uh-huh.
With these characters, because they had a really interesting dynamic going on. We've got an Orion, which we saw. I guess Tendi is the first Orion in Starfleet, and this is
right.
however many further.
Right.
And then we've got a Tellarite, and the Tellarites are the founding members of the Federation, and we've got a human, and the humans are the founding members of the Federation. Like that feels like a very, with the exception of the Orions, it feels like a very foundational or primordial group of people to put on this mission. And I agree that I think that they underused those characters, and I also agree that I think that having Adira put out all of the character backstory for the Orion character just felt, why didn't they let
him tell us
him
that?
tell that? Yeah, that seems like, I mean, and I understand like he didn't want to, but like you could have written it in a way that it made sense that he would just sort of burst out with it or allude to it or something and make it a little bit less info dump. I agree. I don't know.
I think that plot really could have carried the whole episode. I think, and Discovery doesn't always do multiple plot strands in one episode. In fact, I think more often than not, it's one story with maybe some of a B plot. But I think about how season 3 started. The first episode we were only with Michael. Right. And the second episode, I believe we were almost only with the rest of the crew, and then they met up
I think you're right.
At the end.
Yeah.
I just felt, boy, what a great idea for an adventure, and for Tilly to. And I think I would have. Again, I grant it's lazy to speculate about woulda, coulda, shoulda, but I felt I would have responded more to her decision if I'd spent the whole 45 minutes to that point watching her try to grow into a leadership position and save these cadets' lives and all the rest, establish
because that arc was really compelling and really interesting, and she did a great job with it. Mary Wiseman's...
no complaints about the acting. I mean, I felt they didn't give those poor cadets enough to work with.
Right. Yeah. I almost wonder if they didn't surely they trust Mary Wiseman after 3.5 seasons.
Oh, certainly.
But I almost wonder if they didn't trust the cadets and Blue Del Barrio or whoever to be able to carry that story. But I think they could have done it.
Blue Del Barrio has certainly shown their acting chops.
That's true.
And
That's
the cadets, I guess sometimes from my limited experience in theater, you cast somebody and it doesn't work out. But I don't know, at this level, I'd be surprised if they cast somebody in a role for a show this big and
Right.
then said, "Oh no, we made a mistake,"
Yeah. Yeah,
especially
I
three
agree.
times over.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And they did well. So and there's only so much editing that you can do to hide how well that they were.
Yeah.
Or to make it look like they were doing better than they were. I think that I agree. It could have been way better. It could have been more. Yeah, it could have been more. And maybe making it the A plot or maybe it was the B plot of a 3-plot story was a little much.
And
it was 2 pounds of episode in a 1 pound bag.
well, and one of those pounds, the whole diplomatic subplot, I'm sorry, it just did not do it for me. I thought we were being set up for a much bigger crisis than we got because of the way everybody was acting, and Tarina was being all weird, and that was kind of compelling. That was like, here's this character we've come to know a fair amount over the past 2 seasons, especially after last week's episode where she was so, as Kevin and I talked about, so compassionate toward Book, and
right.
just like one of the that shot her up in my estimation to one of the best Vulcans Star Trek has given us yet in 55 years. I thought, wow, this is a great character. So when she was acting all weird, I thought, oh, this is going to be something really big, but it turned out to not be. I mean, again, there was lots of info dump and exposition telling us why it was a big deal, but I didn't feel it.
Right.
I didn't feel it was earned. And I was reminded of, back when Star Trek 2009 came out, The Onion published a piece that had a headline, something to the effect of Star Trek fans accuse new film of being accessible and action-packed and fun, and they illustrated it with a clip from Star Trek 6, which we're going to talk about tonight, of the big conference table scene. And the article was like, haha, look at those Star Trek fans. They like boring stuff. Well,
right.
There was lots of boring stuff in this episode, and I found it boring. I was wishing for some more action and some more fun, and not shoot 'em up, zappy guns necessarily, but boy, that diplomatic subplot to me just dragged on interminably for very little payoff.
Interesting. So I think that one was the one that really was compelling to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
tell.
I'm having a little bit of trouble putting my finger directly on it. I think it was mostly the characters, because we've had this sort of honing of Michael Burnham over the past 4 seasons, and I think she's getting to the point where. Obviously, she's the captain of the Discovery, and she, has, command presence, and she has power and all of that sort of thing, and that's great. But we hadn't really seen her as a diplomat before, and I think that this was giving her a chance to. We've seen her sort of do laser diplomacy with with a phaser in one hand, and I'm doing the one thing that I have to do, but we haven't ever seen her really. I don't think. Well, maybe I guess last season with the science battle, but I don't think we've really seen her do a whole lot of sit down at a table diplomacy, kind of in the vein of a Jean-Luc Picard. And while I don't think that she's quite to the Picard level yet, I thought it was interesting to see her stepping into that role and really honestly at the end of it putting herself on the line and saying, I really want this to work. I really think this will help people. I really think that this is something that the galaxy needs, and I am willing to put myself on the line for that. I thought that sacrifice was really interesting. And I also really liked the interplay between Saru and Trina. I think they might be setting up some sort of romance there. I think that would be interesting. But I think that the thing probably that I really liked about that was the characters and seeing how they went back and forth, and the fact that in the end it turned out that Trina was sort of back channeling, trying to make this happen, even though she couldn't overtly do it, was, I thought, an interesting subversion of the politician doing sneaky stuff. Instead of doing sneaky stuff to hurt the peace talks, she was doing sneaky stuff to try to get them to happen. So, get them to succeed at least. Point.
So that's a fair point. I don't know. I just felt that the culmination of the subplot is we'll form a committee. and you and I are both Presbyterians, so we know something
Yes.
about how exciting committees can be.
Right.
But
and honestly, maybe that's why I felt it had this glimmer of reality to it. I mean, that's maybe the strength of the whole episode, is it felt so real, and maybe that's the real reality of it. Is like,
I suppose I'll grant you it felt real, but
the solution is we're going to form
the
a
solution
committee.
to form a committee of which I will be. I mean, yes, Burnham has. She's not wrong. She has
Right.
that ability to be the bridge between worlds. But I don't know. What sacrifice is she making? That kind of eluded me. You said she made a sacrifice.
Well, I don't think that it was a grand sacrifice in the like laying down on the wire or taking the bullet or anything like that sort of way. I think it was more of a like the political kind of sacrifice. I mean, she was really putting herself out there. She even talked to Rillick about how like the third party needed to take the risk. You know, Rillick couldn't take the risk. Trina couldn't take the risk. So Burnham was able to take that risk in a very political sort of way. It was just, I mean, the fact that, so, I mean, gosh, isn't that such a recognizable thing to us, being someone of two worlds, laying down their political life, I guess, but taking a risk, making a sacrifice in order to bring together two disparate worlds that were connected but have now broken apart. That seems like a really compelling and redemptive story from the Christian view, and I guess that must have been the thing that grabbed me, because all of the things you're saying are totally right, but didn't bother me as much, and I thought that it was I thought it was a compelling episode.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and I mean that one was I guess it hit me a little bit more than it hit you, and I really think it has some redemptive thoughts about being able to join together two worlds because you're a part of each, just like Jesus being fully God and fully man, and being able to pull together two disparate worlds. Burnham is fully Navarian, fully Vulcan, I don't know, and also fully Starfleet, and so she's able to pull together both worlds. If she was only partially either of those things, she wouldn't have been able to do that. And so I thought that was really interesting, and I thought that was a compelling way of looking at it.
Well, that is interesting, because Navar, I'm not sure how much we can equate Navarian and Vulcan, because Navar has many different I don't want the word factions, but elements within its society, right? It's no longer the Trek monoculture that we've had, with
right.
Vulcan. We've got. I remember we have representatives of Romulans and Vulcans, and I think there's fusions of the two in various combinations. Right. So yeah, I guess you're right. That subplot does reflect that diversity coming together in redemptive ways. Yeah.
And they also made sort of explicit the thing that we were talking about a couple of episodes ago about Rillick's heritage being an expression of the unity of this new Federation. And the fact that over the past 700 years, a lot of things have been brought up or settled down from, the Cardassian-Bajoran War, and over the past millennium between the rest of the member worlds of the Federation as well, and it kind of makes me wonder what's happening with the Klingons now, But I guess we've had a lot of Klingon stuff in previous seasons.
We'll find out at some point.
I do too, and I'd love to see, how are the Romulans doing on Navarre now? We've seen the Co-op a lot, but how are the regular Romulans doing?
Right,
Is the Tal Shiar still, a going concern? Surely they are, right? They're like a cockroach. You can't kill them.
That's right. They're like Section 31. You can't ever get rid of them.
Right, exactly. But yeah, so I'm compelled by all of those things, and maybe that's the thing, is I really liked the joining of the two worlds. I liked the characterization of all of the people. I liked the suggestion of the things that could come. But I do agree that it was not necessarily like the most compelling storyline of the season. Though I do think that for this episode, maybe the most compelling storyline of this episode is the one between Book and Culber.
I will agree with you there. Yeah, that was a very compelling. Those two actors together are great. The writing was good. I also had to chuckle a little bit, even though it's not wasn't really a funny situation at all, but when they have Book doing the sand mandala, I couldn't help but think about the person in Lower Decks episode, Moist Vessel, who's doing a sand mandala ostensibly for the purpose of ascending, to enlightenment.
Oh, I forgot about that. You're
I
right.
had to wonder if there was some chuckling behind the scenes at Discovery when they were doing that. But
Oh, man.
And-
You're right.
anyway, but I agree with you. That was a compelling subplot, and I think Kevin called it, or maybe you called it in a previous episode of ours, the normalizing of therapy, and I think that's important. And I like how Dr. Colbert, when he's in therapist mode, is wearing civilian clothing, just casual, and and I think he even allowed as much that in regular therapy, the therapist wouldn't be quite as forthcoming about their own stuff as he was with Book. But again, it made for very dramatic and compelling scenes between them.
Agreed. And I think that the core of that message about how, they have to deal with grief sort of on its own terms almost. Colbert is trying to do all of these things to get Book to come to terms with the reality that Quajon is gone. Book sort of still seems to have it in his head that someday he's going to be able to go back and do that healing ritual that
Right.
Kewi Thulam Kwe, which is, okay, whatever that is.
That's a mouthful. Is that what
It
that
is. Yeah. And sort of like he's saying, like, I can't do this without that. And he was like, well, you're never going to get that. So what are you going to do to fill its place in your mind? That is such a relatable thing for us. I mean, I obviously, well, okay, to my knowledge, neither you nor I nor any of our listeners have ever lost a planet before.
Right.
To my knowledge, I don't claim to know for sure. We might have K-Pax out there listening, but I think that it is such a reality that you have to, if you're going through loss, if you're going through pain, if you're going through even just us in the pandemic, trying to go through life as it is now, we have to reckon with and realize and let go of the idea that everything at least will go back to the way it was before.
Yeah.
And Culber's way of sort of just telling him that in the sort of like no nonsense but still like compassionate way. That truth and love expression is just so powerful.
Yeah.
It does so many things to unlock. I mean, it unlocks Book's heart, but it also, like, even within us, that's got to be the only way to deal with this stuff. It was for me with the current pandemic craziness. It was the fact that I had to come to grips with realizing that we're definitely never going to come back to a world like what we had in 2019 that made me finally able to deal with the world as it is today rather than being on, marking time waiting for everything to get back to normal. We might have I hate the word new normal, like it's been bandied about too much. We might have that, but it was actually letting go of the old world that was able to get me out of myself and get me out of thinking, oh, as soon as things are back to normal, I'll do this thing. No, this is the world we have now. I need to deal with it on that, on its own merits. I need to deal with grief on its own merits, on its own turf.
That is an excellent point. It makes me wonder how many times people can go through that in one lifetime. Like I remember, we never will have the world we had on September 10th, 2001 again.
Yeah, for sure.
My child was born in August of 2001, my first child.
Oh my.
And he's never known a world without the TSA or without the Department of Homeland Security. He thinks we've always taken off the shoes at the airport, and so now this pandemic is another thing where you're right. And how acutely are people feeling this in the holiday season too, I wonder. Right. Churches that can't have pageants because of COVID exposures, or beloved members who are no longer there, or the traditions that, and in families too, that can't happen around Christmas and other holidays at this time, either because of exposures or deaths or distances that just can't be overcome right now safely. So yeah, I think you lift up a very helpful aspect of those scenes, that coming to terms with a way to move forward when we don't know how to move forward, but yet living, and as Kevin says, flourishing. We have to, and so we rely on the Spirit as Christians to help us do that, and we rely on the people around us as Book kind of realizes he's relying on Colbert to give him something that can help him take those steps into a new life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good points, David. I'm glad you brought that up. It makes me feel a little better about the episode overall. Still not probably going to end up on my favorite of the season list when all's said and done, but
yeah,
it makes me feel better about it.
Well, and I think I can't stop thinking about you mentioning the holiday season and sort of all of that, all of the stuff that goes into that. When the church that we go to had announced a thing that they were calling the holiday grieving group, which at first when I heard that I was like, grieving about the holidays? Like, I didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a counseling center sort of as a part of our church, and they were talking about how it is a way to deal with the loss of whatever thing means the holidays to you.
Right.
And gosh, that feels like Book and Colbert in this episode, dealing with the loss of what feels like normal. And in this time, like the holidays and traditions and nostalgia, it's all about wanting to reconnect with that normal. And in normal times, in before times, we might have been able to fool ourselves into thinking that like everything is the same this year. For the holidays, we are going back to what it was, but that was just an illusion. And I think what we've got now is the removal of that illusion. Yeah. And I think that is maybe that's one of the things that I've also had to sort of internalize is the reality that like, yeah, we're not going to be able to go back to that because it was an illusion in the first place.
It really is apocalyptic in the truest original sense of the word, right?
Yeah.
Apocalypse isn't about, the skies falling,
right.
Although metaphorically,
sure.
An apocalypse is about the end of the world. It's about a total revelation and disclosure. And I think you're right. And the holidays can really make that very painful. If listeners out there are so inclined, there are churches that will offer. Sometimes they're called Blue Christmas services. Sometimes they're called Longest Night services, and they're held around the solstice on the 21st. But these are services that, when they're done well, are designed to give people holy space for grieving and for talking about how the story of Christmas we find in the Bible. It is a story that takes place in tough times and in a dark world, and
right.
It lifts up the promise of Christmas that it's light shining in the darkness, and sometimes we don't feel our darkness is dispelled, and that's okay, because that's a promise for the future. Right now we have Emmanuel, God with us, as this tiny, helpless, defenseless, vulnerable child, but nonetheless God with us. So one thing maybe to consider, again, these kind of worship experiences that let the church acknowledge that pain and give space for people to express and to lament. I have found that some holidays to be very powerful, so I offer it for what it's worth.
That's beautiful, and yeah, I think, gosh, for so many people that's going to be so necessary. People who have lost loved ones that would usually, like, what happens when Aunt Sally, who always makes her, pecan pie for Christmas, has passed away from COVID, or just can't make it this year because she's in quarantine or whatever. Gosh, that feels like the sort of thing that is so needed right now. You're right, it is apocalyptic, and maybe not to the level of a planet exploding, but we have lost a world. Gosh,
absolutely.
Maybe I was wrong. But speaking of apocalypses and of losing planets,
I see where you're going with this.
or at least of losing moons. Yes,
An incident.
right. My God.
Oh man, I love George Takei in that scene, just sipping his tea, captain of his own ship at last.
Yes,
We're talking about Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, listeners. If you haven't followed along.
yes, indeed, man. So, just for full disclosure here, this is my second favorite Star Trek film after First Contact. So I know that puts me, I mean, probably comfortably in the majority, having it in second place, but comfortably in the minority, having it above Wrath of Khan.
Well, and both your favorite Star Trek films have had anniversaries this year, so you've had a happy Star Trek year. Regardless of what else is going on this year, you've had a happy Star Trek year.
I have indeed, yes.
Do you have memories of seeing Star Trek VI in the theater? Your Star Trek VI origin story you can share with us?
I don't remember seeing it in the theater. I think I probably did, but I don't remember it. What I do remember was watching the VHS copy over and over and over again. I think this might have been. I was a very weird child. I watched this and like The Hunt for Red October, and gosh, I don't know, probably a couple of other really bizarre things so many times, just over and over and over. I think this was my the first VHS I probably like wore out to the point where it was noticeable while watching. But yeah, we had the classic box set of 6 VHS tapes where when you line them all up in the box, they like have the design on it that all matches up and lines up. And yeah, it's a fantastic film. I love every minute of it. I was trying to watch it today, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to skip around to the good parts and just watch those parts, so that I watched it all. I didn't.
You decided they were all good parts. Huh?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Well, number one, Hunt for Red October is a fine film. I don't think you need to be apologetic or think that made you a weird kid for wanting to watch that over and over. I'm overdue to watch it myself again. Casey McFadden, I'm sure you remember, is in that film.
Oh, that's right. Yes, briefly. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Briefly, as she's Jack Ryan's wife, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right.
I saw Star Trek VI in the theater in Williamsburg, Virginia, with my college roommates at the time. We were all 3 Star Trek fans, and so we were very excited that we were going to get to see on opening night Star Trek VI in the theater, and we had a fun time watching it.
That would have been fun.
It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and they even for Christmas that year, one of them gave me a Star Trek VI poster to put up, put up the room. And then when we departed for the summer, they took the poster home with them for safekeeping, and I never got it back because we weren't roommates again the next year, and I didn't feel like so anyway. But I don't think that was their plan all along. It just kind of happened. But yeah, it was exciting to see, especially because this was also the year 1991 where the 2-part TNG episode Unification aired, and in the first scene of Unification Part 2, where Leonard Nimoy's really making his entrance into this story, he says something about, I made it a bad decision years ago and jeopardized Captain Kirk and the crew's safety. And it was, you didn't know quite what it was, but you knew, this is them teasing Star Trek VI, right? So it was all very exciting to experience that in real time and to then wait a few more months till Star Trek VI hit the theater. And so I enjoyed it at the time. I will tell you, it's not my second favorite Star Trek movie, and it's not my first favorite Star Trek movie. And it goes down a little bit in my estimation every time I watch it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not real overly impressed with it.
Well, I went ahead and jotted down a couple of thoughts about why I love it.
That sounds good. Yeah.
So first of all, the first one is depth. I feel like it's written like a political drama wrapped around a submarine thriller, wrapped around a courtroom drama, wrapped around a prison escape movie, wrapped around a whodunit. And I just, the crossing of all of those different genres is just mind-blowingly well executed to me. It's got so much depth to it to where like none of them seem out of place. It's not like there's like all of a sudden a cooking show in the middle or whatever, although there are mashed potatoes.
Well, no, it's not the Star Wars holiday special. I'll grant you that.
Yeah. But it feels like it has a lot of depth from a story perspective, but it's also very thoughtful. It's not just interesting storyline, it also says very interesting things about old grudges and new futures, what it takes to move from one to the other. And it was written in a time, as I'm sure you well know, it was written pretty much in the only time in recent memory that would make sense in the United States, with the fall of the Soviet Union and all of that. So it was very thoughtful and speaking to the time, right? But also, it does have some really interesting action. It presents these very human ideas, and I realize that the very name is racist, against the backdrop of one of the most enduring sci-fi ideas of the undetectable, indestructible threat, which, now that I'm saying that, I'm realizing that also describes The Hunt for Red October. So like maybe there's a connection there. But just the bird of prey that you can't detect, but it can completely wreck your day just out of the blue, right? And then a little subnote here, by the way, the music is just breathtaking. Cliff Idleman did the score for this, and his fanfare sort of as the ship is leaving space dock is it blows me away, almost brings me to tears every time I watch it. And
I will agree with you there. And I think part of the reason it does is because it's not the major I'm not using these terms musically technically, but it's not the major mode of that score. That score is very much a dark score, a very contemplative at times, very mysterioso most of the time. Lots of traumatic music, like the score that the passage where the assassins are beaming aboard Kronos 1 and killing the Chancellor. Boy, that's some very pulse, the pulse of doom, boom, boom. So yes, I agree. Cliff Idleman, and you know the backstory of how that score came to be, I assume?
Oh, I don't know if I do. Why don't you tell me?
Well, Nicholas Meyer originally wanted to score the film with the Planets by Gustav Holst.
Oh, okay.
And also, I think with the Firebird by Stravinsky, but especially with Planets, I know for sure they couldn't afford the rights, and so they found Idleman. Meyer found Idleman and gave him Holst's Planets and Stravinsky's Firebird and said, "Make it sound like this." And so, if you compare the overture to Star Trek VI with the first movement of the Planets, Mars, Bringer of War, you'll hear the affinity between those two pieces. And but that's not to diminish what Idleman did. It's a very masterful borrowing of that feel. Using his own material.
And they say that good artists borrow, great artists steal, I think. Is that what they say?
Something like that. I've heard something like that.
Great artists steal is the one that I remember for sure. So, so the music is just, I mean, spot on. It's what I think of when I think of really good original series music. I mean, obviously there's the sort of... for sure. I mean, like there's obviously a couple of snatches of other music. The really exultant music at the end of Voyage Home. The really like thoughtful and sort of almost magical sound of the Wrath of Khan when they're escaping with the Enterprise out of space dock and all. But the music here, I feel like from beginning to end, feels like the original series to me.
I think that's fair. Yeah. In a good way.
Yeah. Yes.
Because not all absolutely. TOS music is good music, but a lot of it is.
Yes. Yeah. Also the acting in this film, the main crew, the guest stars, all a memorable performance. I mean, it's no surprise then that like Brock Peters and Kurtwood Smith and Renee Auberjonois were all asked to return later for other roles within this universe because they did such an excellent job in their role on this film. And I think that is a credit to probably casting, but also to the actors themselves. Like, this was just well cast and well acted, and the performances of William Shatner and Christopher Plummer right up against each other like that, where they're sort of seething and seeping out this almost hatred, but couched within a professional game respect game kind of feel, all with the undercurrent of like we have to act friendly to one another because like this is a political tete-a-tete inside this transporter. The acting was fantastic, is what I'm trying to get down to that. And I also even liked a lot of the good one-liners, like, "Are we firing torpedoes? I wish I knew." And hence the word sabotage, which
that word has a special place in Star Trek fans' heart, of course.
Yes,
thanks to William Shatner's unique pronunciation of it. But well, it's true. Plummer and Shatner do get those face-to-face moments that Shatner and Montalban were denied in Star Trek II.
Right.
So I can only imagine Nicholas Meyer, who wrote both films. He's not credited with Star Trek II, but he's the one who pulled the 5 or 6 different versions of the script together to give us the script we have. He did an uncredited rewrite. So I can only imagine that the man who wrote both those films was trying to remedy, let's have Kirk in the same room face-to-face with his antagonist. And it's not only, I do like that scene in the transporter room that you mentioned. I do enjoy the crew's kind of rapidly letting down their guard as soon as the Klingons have beamed away. And, Kirk saying, "Can tell us if there's any other way we can screw up tonight," which is a remarkably contemporary sounding remark for Star Trek then. It would sound right at home in Discovery. I wouldn't bat an eye. I mean, heck, they're dropping F-bombs on Discovery, but for me to hear Captain Kirk talk about screwing up something, I thought, whoa, they don't talk like that in Star Trek. But it's a nice moment. And also, I was going to say, Plummer and Shatner, the scenes on Kronos 1 they have are the way Plummer plays the bit where he's charging them with the murder of Chancellor Gorkon. I don't even know how to describe what he's doing there, but it's a kind of anger smoldering beneath this level of weariness, and it's a masterful scene, and the courtroom scene that for me is the highlight of the film.
It's fantastic.
I mean, it's what the Klingons have been waiting for all these years, right? To have Kirk on trial. I like how McCoy kind of gets an unexpected laugh, and he kind of warms up for a second with this big goofy grin, and then remembers, oh yeah, these McCoy's just a good guy. He wants to make people happy, But
then Plummer's choice saying, "You have a singular wit, Doctor," and just this sort of like nonplussed, very quiet voice. It's completely not Klingon, but it's fantastic and it's perfect for the character.
It's menacing.
Yes.
And then a few minutes later, he's far from quiet. Don't wait for the translation. Answer me now. I mean, that's a fabulous scene. Everything else you mentioned as one of the movie's strengths, I do tend to see as weaknesses. I think the plot is hopelessly cluttered with all those different genres, and the movie can't decide what it wants to be. Yes, Leonard Nimoy was directly inspired by the breakup of the Soviet Union and Gorbachev's efforts at Glasnost, but I don't feel the movie says anything substantial to that time.
Interesting. Okay.
Which has now passed, and which I feel dates the movie, unfortunately, for a Star Trek film. I feel like it was almost too of the moment, too current. I mean, I know Star Trek has always addressed the issues of the day. It's not that I object to it doing that, but I mean, and again, maybe I'm wrong to criticize, because at the time, who knew? People were pronouncing the end of history because liberal democracy had won the day, when, as it turns out, we now know it hasn't even necessarily won the day here in the U.S. Right. So, but unfortunately that was a short-lived moment, and I feel Star Trek tried to address it and did not end up saying anything of substance to the political moment. I think there were some nods given. Anyway, so yeah, I don't think it's aged well. I think it's a kind of confused genre. I think my other major criticism of the film is it resolves relatively quickly and easily. Why does Sulu happen to know where the peace conference is? Why were we not told before that Sulu would have this knowledge? It coming right on the heels of a use of the mind meld that I find pretty problematic.
I don't disagree with that.
I believe the only other mind meld we've seen Spock perform without someone's consent, well, I guess we've seen 2. We saw one in Star Trek 2009. But before that point, the only one we'd seen was him imparting his katra to Dr. McCoy in Star Trek 2, when he gave an acknowledgement in the moment that it was a questionable choice. You'll pardon me, Doctor, but I have no time to discuss this logically. So there was an acknowledgement in the film that this is not okay at some level, but, hang with us, and next movie you'll find out why it was the right thing to do, right? But when he when Kirk orders Spock, it's a direct command, I believe, to get the information from Valeris's mind. And when Spock seemingly doesn't bat an eye, as I recall, in the novelization, J.M. Dillard does some stuff to make it so that Valeris gives consent, which, I don't remember how that all works right now, but I find it an icky scene, especially given how close these characters are. We've established earlier in the film.
Right.
Maybe, I don't know. I just find, and then what makes it even worse for me is the people on the bridge are uncomfortable with it. I can distinctly remember, I believe, one shot of Uhura kind of wincing at this. This is they know this is not quite right. So everybody on the bridge knows it's weird. Some of us in the audience think it's weird, and then as soon as it's over, Spock makes a joke. I've been dead before, It's just, it doesn't ring true to me, to that character. I don't like it. And then that's when Sulu comes in with this knowledge that, how long has he had it? Why did we know to contact Captain Sulu? I missed that plot point. And then they beam down and save the president in what feels like kind of finally an attempt to get Gene Roddenberry's fantasy of the Enterprise crew saving JFK from assassination, on screen. He always was proposing that plot for the Star Trek movies, and now that he's dead, okay, we'll do something along those lines. I don't know. I just find the movie wraps up too hastily and kind of sloppily, and now none of that is to say there's not things worth discussing in the film, but that's my take on the film as a film.
Well, now I for the record, do not disagree at all about the mind meld being a very problematic story point. I think probably it felt a lot more justified in the early 90s, but
you're right. They probably wouldn't do that scene today.
Right.
I think Star Trek reflects the culture for good and for ill.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Usually for better, but sometimes it's just we're all of our time.
Sure. But I don't think that you were saying that it feels dated to you. I don't think it does personally, because we, with the exception of naming the Chancellor of the Klingon Empire Gorkon after Gorbachev, like with that exception, it doesn't seem like it necessarily has to be the Americans and the Soviets. Like, that doesn't feel like it has to be the coding of this. I think that it is perfectly relevant in the case of any two warring people, because I think it's less a story about this particular moment in time. And of course it had to be written at this moment in time because it had to be fresh in the mind. But I think that it's evergreen because it's talking about people sort of coming to terms with a way of reconciling with a long time enemy. And I think we're gonna probably see that come up over and over and over again. It was with the Soviets in the early 90s, but it has been other groups of people in the past, and it will be other groups of people in the future, I think. And I think that the biggest thing that really knocks me down about all of this is that it's a story at its core about the sanctification of James T. Kirk. After Sulu's offer of help at the very beginning of the film, it basically shows the Federation, and exemplified by Captain Kirk, at perhaps their worst,
Agreed. I agree with you there.
which I mean, I think that rings much more true, maybe even today, looking at all of the sort of the evil in coming up in places that we thought were so good before. All of the people who are being sort of outed as, in one way or another, very sinful people within the church and within church Christian organizations, within the government, within other groups. We are seeing a lot more of that even today than we were seeing then, and so I think that even rings a lot more true now. I read that according to Nick Meyer, Brock Peters found Admiral Cartwright's dialogue during the briefing room scene about calling the Klingons the alien trash of the universe to be so offensive that he actually took several takes to be able to actually even say them all. We get Chekhov saying, "Guess who's coming to dinner?" it was originally scripted for Uhura, but Nichelle Nichols refused to say it because of its racist connotations.
Yep.
The bosons saying, what about that smell? And only the top of the line models can even talk. Kirk's comparison of Chang to Hitler. I mean, they
well, yes,
they were
not without.
Sure.
I mean,
yes,
the line
mean,
is we need breathing room.
Yes. And it is a fair comparison in that moment, but the fact that he jumps to that point, and the fact that he even makes a log that comes out later in Klingon court, like I've never trusted Klingons, and I never will.
Yeah, you're right. Hitler does shut down debates whenever he's invoked. So,
and maybe not quite as much in 1991 or 92, but it definitely does now. And I think that.
Oh no, I think even then, because back then we all agreed Nazis were bad. So,
well, that's fair. But I mean, in the internet culture of comparing everyone to Nazis was not quite as in vogue then. And again, like I said, it's a fair comparison because of the words that Chang is using in that moment, but it still is not a good look.
I'll give you that. Yep. Yeah.
And even their attempt to sort of make amends is couched in this language that is offensive, as that we're saying, in Alien, if you could only hear yourselves, human rights, why the very name is racist.
Right.
They're not at their best, and they all of this stuff to the point where even like the actors portraying these characters are recognizing how vile and bad all of this is, and it's sort of all headed up by, or at least put on the shoulders of, Kirk when they put him on trial there in the center of the film, in the middle of the film. It's all right there. They're basically putting the Federation on trial for hating and mistrusting and wanting to do away with the Klingons. The first half of the movie is basically Spock dragging the crew of the Enterprise and the entire Federation kicking and screaming to the table.
Right.
And even once they get there, it takes a crisis to truly get them on board.
Yeah.
And I think when I was watching today, I narrowed down the exact moment where Kirk makes the decision to start to change, and it's when he's facing down the Kronos One has stopped listing to the side and is turned around and is facing toward them and is arming phasers or torpedoes or whatever, and he has to decide what to do. He could return to what he knows: shields up, charge phasers, arm torpedoes, all of that sort of stuff. And you can see that running through his head, and you probably think everyone on screen and in the theaters are expecting exactly that. And it's all running through his head, and the shock on everyone's faces. Yeah, I mean, it sort of, it doesn't hit me as much because it is so, like, I know this film so much, but the shock on everyone's faces when he says, "Signal our surrender." Gosh, that is such a moment, right? That is such a necessary time, and realizing how much of our conflict with other people and our conflict with even with our enemies could be shut down with a simple surrender, not a complete surrender of our will or of our action, but maybe a surrender of our right to retaliate, a surrender of our need to have the last word, our surrender of our maybe even just our rights in general, like our rights to not be hurt in a certain way or whatever. And I'm not saying be a doormat. I'm not saying...
Oh, understood, yeah.
But to just say, look, let's surrender our anger and our rage. Let's surrender our long-held and long built-up biases and even bigotry. Let's put that down for a second. Let's surrender that and deal with each other as people. Because that moment when he says "signal our surrender" is like, he realizes that the Klingons are people. And I don't know if he consciously realizes that in his head, but the remainder of the film is him being sanctified, I think. From that moment on, I should say, not the remainder, but like from that moment on is him being sanctified into a person who can, at the end, save the president of the Federation. He can save the Klingons. He can actually actively work against the Federation for the good of the Klingons. And that moment that begins his sanctification just feels like a salvation moment to me. And seeing what it has wrought in him over the rest of the film is just a really interesting way of seeing sort of the ups and downs, the pitfalls, and the growth and the backsliding of anybody who is in that situation.
I like that take on it. I will say that one thing I used to hold against this film was how out of character all the Starfleet crew seemed for most of it. But that is no longer one of my objections, because while I used to spend a lot of time and energy saying, oh, Scotty would never say something like that, Uhura would never, Kirk would never say that, let them die, which William Shatner was uncomfortable with, and tried to get some hand gestures in there to show Kirk wanted to take back the words as soon as he said them. But I've grown to appreciate that the script is showing us our characters being human, and so that's part of the human condition from which we do have to be redeemed, and which we do need sanctified. So I think you're right in that, and I no longer count that as one of the film's flaws, that it shows that it dares to show our Star Trek heroes in a less than flattering light. I think that's okay. Yeah. You said something, unless I misheard you, Kirk actively working against the Federation for the good of the Klingons? Not working against the Federation, but working against agents of the Federation. You've got Admiral Cartwright and the other people who are sort of behind this conspiracy, and he is working. Well, they've betrayed the the vision of the Federation, right?
Right. Whereas I think that a maybe more Star Trek 3-ish or Star Trek 4-ish Captain Kirk might have been less likely to turn against those people, and maybe he wouldn't have helped them, but he might have turned a blind eye toward what they were trying to do.
I don't know. He's on the run from Starfleet at the end of Star Trek 3. Now it's not conspiratorial Starfleet, but
but just with the fact that they had the Klingons had just killed his son, and so he's sort of at his darkest moment of these people that I have been fighting for the past 20 years of my life, however long, have now done the ultimate evil against me. And maybe, like I said, maybe he wouldn't have actively gone along with this conspiracy, but I think he probably would have been a lot more likely to turn a blind eye.
It could be.
And if he was on the bridge facing off against Kronos 1 at that moment, I think he would have been a lot more likely to put up his shields and defend himself in that moment instead of surrendering.
Yeah. You talk about the film to you feeling more timely, perhaps, than it did even when it was released. And I'll say the one moment it might approach that for me is when Valeris accuses Kirk and the others of being the real traitors. That feels uncomfortably timely. Yeah. When we have people who, as I said, don't really believe in our system of government here, actively working to take it down and accusing those who want to preserve it, those in both parties, and all parties who want to preserve it, of being traitors. That is very uncomfortably timely. To the point you make about surrendering our rights, I think that's a very keen insight into the film and into Christ's message. And again, without making ourselves doormats and opening ourselves up, for endless abuse and that kind of thing. There are points where we need to not insist on our rights. I think the Apostle Paul talks about that when he was among these congregations he was founding and nurturing, he did not insist on his rights as an apostle, to be paid. I believe he worked with his own hands making tents instead of earning his living from the congregation. I think that's very true. I'm impressed by. I really, there was a slightly extended version of this film released later where they added back in some cut scenes. You mentioned Rene Auberjonois earlier. He's only in the cut scenes. Right. I generally don't think those scenes add a whole lot to the movie. Sure. But the one scene I do like and wish had been retained was where Colonel West is presenting the operation, what's it called even, Operation Retrieval or whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to get in, get out, minimum casualties. He's got this whole military thing the Federation could easily pull off to get Kirk and McCoy back, but the president shoots him down. Pardon the pun. It's and then it's in the finished film, this line where the president, it's an allusion to Nixon, one of the film's several allusions to Nixon.
Sure.
But he says this president is not above the law. So I think the president of the Federation, I really like that guy. He's got a couple of different names in the tie-in literature, but I really like him. And because he's modeling, and it's such a small role, but he's modeling, we don't always insist on our way.
Right.
And we don't even always insist on what we know we would have a right to. I mean, there's probably some extradition treaty or what, I don't know, there's some law that would cover the situation, but the Federation president has decided, and I think, isn't there even a line, in the interest of interstellar peace and the forthcoming accords, we're not going to, we'll let you try them. They're under your jurisdiction for now. So I think that ties in with what you're saying about how part of being sanctified is learning to, when we don't have to and shouldn't insist on our rights because it's the redemptive thing to do.
Yeah, and you've mentioned Paul a couple times, and I think he also talks about how even as a Christian, he has the right to eat meat sacrificed.
Yes, exactly.
To idols.
Another great example. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But he chooses to lay that down for the sake of the weaker brother, for the sake of the weaker brother, by the way, who may well think of themselves as the stronger one because they are holding fast and they are not eating meat sacrificed to idols. But he has decided to lay down that right. He has decided to surrender. And I'm sure that the shock on the faces of the people reading that letter, in the face of the early church being, saying, no, you don't have to be circumcised. You don't have to follow the Mosaic law. You don't, or not all of the Mosaic law. You don't have to follow all of these pieces of what we used to be. But despite the fact that you are no longer bound by that, despite the fact that you have all of these freedoms, like Christ laid down his freedom on the cross, like he did lay down his life, like he laid down his divinity, we can lay down our rights. We can lay down our, maybe even a little bit of our own will.
Yes, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, how much of Christian literature and music and discussion is about surrendering the will to God and to Christ? Right. And again, that can be abused to be a form of abuse, by people in positions of authority in churches or in the household, whatever, but biblically it's not meant to be a way of grinding people down or hurting them. It's a way of, it's meant to help us all achieve freedom, You mentioned the law. The law given to Moses was never intended for the Gentiles. So when the church is welcoming Gentiles in, it's saying, yes, join us. We're one in Christ, and we have the law, but you don't observe that. It's not for you. It's for us. God's plan has room for all of us in our own unique ways. But one of those common things is, thy will be done. It's one of the foundational prayers of our faith, right? Jesus told us to pray, thy will be done on earth right now as it is in heaven. So, and that's what the kingdom of God is and will be when God's will is fully and finally done on earth as it is in heaven. So I can get behind that for sure. Yeah.
Well, and I think that there's also so much of the history of the Jewish people was so antagonistic toward and from the Gentiles that there is this sort of reconnection of those two groups within Christianity because of the work of Christ. That it is echoed by this connection of the Federation with the Klingons after all of this animosity, and the way that Spock mentions that the end of 40 years of unremitting hostility. It was way longer for the Gentiles, but it all began with Christ's sacrifice, with his surrender of his will, of his divinity.
I agree. I want to say I think that on the Jew-Gentile hostility point, Jews have historically gotten the worst of that from Gentiles. Yeah. But yes, I mean, we do have things like Ephesians that talk about he is the one who breaks down the walls of hostility between us. And, so the theme of reconciliation, I'll grant you, the movie does have that going for it. I feel like it could have been foregrounded more. There's my lazy criticism again. But I'll grant you it's there. And I think that final scene at Camp Kittimer where Chancellor Azatbur tells Kirk, "You've restored my father's faith." That moment feels really earned to me. I don't quite feel so much about Kirk's line, "You've restored my sons," because, well, we didn't see David express much of anything about faith and Klingons and humans finding peace in Star Trek 2 and 3. But even in Star Trek 6 itself, all we know about Kirk's son is that he's dead. I'm not sure we even hear his name mentioned in the whole film. All we need to know for the movie is the Klingons kill Kirk's son. It's a plot point. So that moment that Kirk responds, "You restored my sons," doesn't feel earned to me, but I appreciate that it's an attempt to articulate the theme of reconciliation in an overt way there at the end of the film.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yes. I think the thing that really hits me about all of this is that even the best of us, even, Captain Kirk, presented it within the Star Trek franchise as being sort of the best of humanity. We all need prompting to do what is right sometimes, to actually lay down our will for the sake of the common good or for the sake of others or whatever. He's so sort of defined by his reaction to the Kobayashi Maru and his need to win and his hatred of the no-win scenarios. Sometimes the real solution, the real way to win, is to lose intentionally, to surrender, to put down our arms. Like as with all sanctification, this sort of fight against needing to assert our own will, whether that be our own personal need to be right or need to do. Need to get the last word on social media or whatever, or if it even be racism or sexism or a feeling of needing to be in domination over another for some reason or another. That fight, that sanctification, is always going to be an ongoing battle, and there's always going to be some sort of growth there, and so. Or there's always going to need to be, rather, whether or not there actually is. And so that's why I think I agree with you that that moment where Azatbur says that, you've restored my father's faith, that makes sense to me, that he is actually growing, and the fact that he is growing is the thing that makes her feel that way. I think that's beautiful.
Kirk becomes in that moment a sign of, we would say, the spirit at work, right?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, that might not be recognized by all in the context of the Star Trek world, but if you're as I like this image you're presenting of, we're seeing the fruits of the spirit there in Kirk's life.
Well, and like you said, he goes from the beginning of the film saying "let them die" to saving their lives at the end is at great cost to himself, right? But that journey of his is a beautiful sign of sanctification. It might not necessarily even seem logical to see the Kirk at the beginning of the movie and connect him with the Kirk at the end of the movie, based on all of the pain that he suffered and all of the loss that he suffered. But as Spock says, logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end.
Right. Well, David, I have to say, it's still not my favorite Star Trek film, but you have made me appreciate Star Trek 6 a little more. I was coming into this conversation not sure that was going to happen. I could see myself having the last word, grousing about what I don't like about it. But sanctification, I like that, and I'm in need of it, as we all are, ongoing.
Indeed.
We are in the process of being saved. So,
yes.
So thank you for your insights. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not good at this, so I also need that sanctification as well. So, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And now let's get to our audience question.
Indeed. Well, thank you for that, Kevin. Glad you could make it into the show, at least in a little promo read there.
Indeed.
But I think we need to get to our audience question now. And Mike, I think you have one for us.
We have the question. The question is this. It's a fun question.
Okay.
Do any of your Christmas traditions involve Star Trek?
Huh, interesting. I'm trying to think of, is there anything particularly Christmassy about Star Trek? And, of course, my mind is going straight to Generations.
Well, that is the Star Trek Christmas movie. I saw people arguing about this on Twitter the other day.
Yes.
But how can it not be when
Absolutely.
part of the movie is set at Christmas time, even if it's only illusory or a memory or whatever?
Uh-huh. Yep, absolutely. I mean, it definitely is, and it has, it features a long-awaited savior of a type coming in sort of supernatural ways
That's
out of the
true.
Nexus. I think that's got some definite legs to it. As far
Now, are
as
you referring to Kirk when you say that? Because
yes,
he's going then from being sanctified in Star Trek VI to being a savior figure in his next Star Trek movie.
You're right.
So I think you've hit on something for sure.
Layers upon layers.
And of course, there's also the Christmas party at the science lab on the Enterprise in Dagger of the Mind, where Dr. Helen Noel. Nice writing on the staff's part there. Dr. Noel suggests it happen a different way. It's kind of a cringeworthy thing, like nowadays, 50 years later, but there is that Christmas connection. But I tell you, I do, while you're thinking of yours, I've got a fun Christmas Star Trek tradition. Okay. When I was in college, my aforementioned roommate, one of them, was working at the local Hallmark store, and he bought and gave to me the 1992 Hallmark Star Trek Christmas ornament, which was not the Enterprise, not the first Enterprise they did the year before. We missed out on that one. Nobody knew it was coming. It's hard to find, and you have to pay a lot of money for it these days. Yeah. But he gave me the shuttlecraft Galileo, and it lights up with this nice yellow light on the inside, and when you press the button on the underneath, Leonard Nimoy's voice says, "Shuttlecraft to Enterprise, shuttlecraft to Enterprise, Spock here. Happy holidays. Live long and prosper." If I'd known we were going to talk about this, I would have brought it down.
That's
played
fantastic.
It's so great. And so for years, he gave me the Hallmark Star Trek ornament every year. And then for a while there, it was sporadic, so I started getting them for myself, and so I have duplicates of some. and now he's moved on to not giving those anymore. He got married, and I guess they had to give more respectable Christmas gifts. I don't know, but it's so fun. And I've actually not bought the last couple of years because Hallmark has moved away from making replica starships to making. Well, they started making scenes, and I do have some of those. Like I have. McCoy. Well, here's a mind meld that was forced, but it was Mirror Spock. It was the evil Spock forcing the mind meld on McCoy and Mirror. I've got that as a scene. I've got Captain Pike in his wheelchair, and it beeps and lights up, and the flashes for yes and no. And I've got Spock dying in Star Trek II. That's an ornament, and there was lots of laughing online when that came out. But I believe Kevin was one of the people who even posted the meme about, yes, it's perfect because here's somebody who gave his life to save his friends and came back later to much rejoicing. So, it's a great scene for Christmas ornament. But all that's to say, Hallmark has moved on from those kind of small-scale things to big tree toppers with lots of large interlinked ornaments that they play out a whole scene from a mirror right now. And so it's gotten too big and too pricey for my tastes. But I do have a nice collection of Star Trek ships. And so every year I drape a fake garland down the banister, and I have a little 3-foot-tall tree that my wife bought me a few years ago to add to it because I've had too many ornaments. But so I have my Star Trek ornament display, and that's something I look forward to putting up every holiday season.
That's fantastic.
The true meaning of Christmas, right?
Well, and I heard that your daughter has a name for the Amok Time music.
Oh, yes, she does. She calls it the Runaway Monkey music. Dun, 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 dun. Because when she was only 3 years old when that ornament came out, and I pressed the music for it, and we started dancing to it. And I did a silly dad kind of dance, waving my arms around. So she called it, she said, "Dad, you look like a runaway monkey." So, yeah, it's the Runaway Monkey music from Amok Time.
That's fantastic. Oh, I love it.
So how about you? How does Star Trek figure into your holiday festivities?
Well, so we my wife and I watch Star Trek, when it comes out, but that's not a holiday thing. It's not a special thing.
Every day's a holiday when Star Trek's on.
Exactly, that's right. I think the big thing for me is one of my favorite things, sort of throughout my whole life about Christmas, is the quiet moment. Usually, it's probably about a week before Christmas or so, when you just are trying to catch your breath, and you sit down in the living room and you're looking at the Christmas tree, and just sort of you get lost in the lights. That feels like home, and it feels like nostalgia. We were talking about like going back to normal and that sort of thing. That feels normal to me. And I think it doesn't seem like it's a Star Trek moment, but stick with me here. In the Star Trek Voyager episode, gosh, what was it? It was Death Wish. When Quinn is trying to hide from Q, he takes the Voyager and hangs it on a Christmas tree.
Yes, he does.
And that one, along with, Picard looking at the Christmas tree in the Nexus and seeing the star going nova and then reforming and going nova, that always reminds me, those moments feel like that moment of just the sort of like sitting and catching your breath. And the holiday season is not over, not by a long shot, but you're catching your breath, you're experiencing this quiet time that is sort of in its own way kind of holy, and you're just sort of living in it for a little bit. I guess that's my non-tradition Star Trek tradition, because I really enjoy that moment. I haven't had it yet this year. Hopefully that'll come this week.
Well, we're not quite a week from Christmas yet. Christmas is still 10 days away as we record this. So
you're right.
I hope you'll get that moment and many moments like that, because it is easy to get caught up in all the hullabaloo that comes with what our culture calls Christmas.
Yeah, that's for sure.
That was one of the reasons that led me to keep getting those ornaments for myself, was because, of course, Star Trek has nothing to do with the real meaning of Christmas. Well, I shouldn't say that, because the whole premise of our podcast is that it does, right? But on the surface, let's say,
sure,
Captain Pike, disfigured in his beeping wheelchair, says nothing about the gospel necessarily as a plastic ornament, right? But I figured,
by the way, monkey music is not exactly a Christmas carol.
I wonder if we could say, well, anyway. No, you're right, it's not. But I figured, well, that's just going to be part of my fun Christmas, and I still have the real meaning of Christmas. That doesn't, the culture can do what it wants, and I can do as much of that or as little of that as I want to, without forgetting, what it really is all about. This incredible miracle of the incarnation.
Yes.
So I don't know what our listeners, if you have some Star Trek traditions you'd like to tell us about, please do. But if you do or don't, we all hope, and I'm sure I speak for Kevin here too, and we'll speak to you again before Christmas Day, but hope you do have moments of peace and joy and comfort and hope this Christmas.
And surrender.
Yes, and sanctity.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, what do we have coming up next week?
Well, next week, among other various and sundry Trek items I'm sure we'll be talking about Episode 5 of Star Trek Discovery Season 4, which is titled The Examples.
Interesting.
I wonder if they'll be like presenting parables to us, or making an example out of someone, or I don't know. I guess we'll find out soon enough.
I mean, clearly it's about following someone as they follow Christ, right? Emulate.
Yes, be imitators of me as I imitate Christ.
Yeah, there you go.
I wonder who's playing the Apostle Paul in this episode.
Clearly, Discovery is doing all of this, directly at us. They're writing all of their titles and episodes for us.
We've already established they don't tell us their release dates just to tick Kevin off. So
That's right. I think they're very well aware of us. Well, in the meantime, please like, share, comment, rate, and subscribe wherever you can do that. And also send us your questions. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and The Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook. Or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your question on the show.
And you can support the show by using the support button on anchor.fm/GATST or by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/GospelTrekPodcast. You can support the show, help us make good content, and get some cool perks as well.
And that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you very much for being here. We'll be back next time with Kevin. And until then,
I'm Mike Pochie.
And I'm David Atwell.
And coming to you live from the editing booth, I'm Kevin Sinise, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. And I'll really see you next time.